Leaf, it is time for another conference preview series. I love these. These have been so much fun for an opportunity for us to get a chance to learn kind of the ins and outs, the movement going on in these mid-major conferences. I think it's easy to focus on the biggest transfer news of the offseason, but there's thousands of players transferring every year, and it's kind of fun to see some of the movement that happened at some of those lower levels. And we start with the Summit League in conference realignment. Western Illinois is leaving for this upcoming season. They're going to join the Ohio Valley Conference. Western Illinois is a inaugural member of the Summit League. They've been in the league since 1982, gone through a name change in the league, but they have been there for that long. 9-9 last year, 16-14 overall. But amazingly, despite being in the league for over 40 years, this team has never once made the NCAA tournament, never once won a tournament championship out of the Summit League. So not necessarily a devastating blow to the Summit League, at least from a men's basketball perspective. But again, they are down one team heading into next year. Conference realignment, always a big storyline, but really, Leaf, I think it's fair to say the biggest storyline taking place in the Summit League this year, and we've talked about it a handful of times with other conferences, is the amount of talent leaving the conference. We talked about it with the Big Sky, but it's really pronounced in the Summit League because two of the biggest transfers in all of college basketball, unquestionably, are Max Abmas heading from Oral Roberts to Texas and Grant Nelson heading from North Dakota State to Alabama. Two of the top 5, top 10 at least, biggest transfer movement of the entire offseason. Abmas is a 20-point per game scorer, helped lead Oral Roberts to a Sweet 16. He goes to Texas to play for Rodney Terry. Grant Nelson, the unicorn, a guy who had a highlight reel tape last year that made the rounds viral on social media, of course, was at the NBA Draft Combine as well with you. He ends up going to Alabama. I want to ask about those two guys, but a couple other transfers as well. Connor Vanover, 7'3" center, leaving Oral Roberts to go to Mizzou. Andrew Rohde goes from St. Thomas to Virginia. Tassos Kamateros goes from South Dakota to Vanderbilt. So a handful of guys moving up to that Power 5 level. But Leaf, we saw Baylor Shireman have a ton of success at Creighton last year coming from South Dakota State. He did not look like a player who was unprepared for the move from the Summit League to the Big East. Now you have Grant Nelson going to Alabama and the SEC, which SEC and the Big East are both great, but there is a difference being a post player and a rim protector having to go into the SEC. And now, of course, Abmas goes over to Texas. And how, with those two guys in particular, a lot of eyeballs are going to be on them and how they do with this transition up to those levels. How do you kind of foresee their seasons going at Texas and Alabama, respectively?
So the first thing I think is important to address here is Baylor Shireman was unquestionably the best player in the Summit League.
Yeah.
Like when he was there, like when South Dakota State played Providence, and Providence was a 4 seed and they made the Sweet 16, and they were a pretty lucky team. Like you could look at the metrics on Ken Palm, but that was a Big East, like solid team. And Shireman was the best player on the court by a mile.
Yeah.
Like he didn't even have a good game because it was like well scripted against him, but you could see all the attention he drew. And then he goes to the Big East and he goes to a good Creighton team. But I think a large reason that Creighton team was good is because he was probably the 4th best player. And so the reason I bring that up is Grant Nelson was a best player on his team last year by a mile. Yeah. I don't think he'll be a top 3 player for Alabama. Abmas was the best player by a mile in the league. And now he goes to Texas, and I'm not sure he's the best player in his backcourt. So to me, I think their impacts can be measured in terms of winning, but you're not going to see the same player. Like Baylor Shireman was actually exceptional in the Big East. He was exceptional at his role, though. He wasn't the star. Like there were 3 players that were definitely better on his team, and you can make an argument. Actually, I'd say he's 4th pretty confidently, but like there's an argument that could have been made that he was the 5th best player in Creighton. But the thing about Shireman is he fits the system really well. I'm curious to see how well Max Abmas can fit a system as he has been the system. I think Rodney Terry's squad, where he's got guard play in droves over there, like I think that Hunter and him are going to share a backcourt. I think even with Marcus Carr, who was a 6th year, there was a little bit my turn, your turn at times, and it sometimes was detrimental. It ended up being good for a while. But Abmas has been the guy with the ball in his hands. I'm more curious about Nelson. Nelson, to me, was an athletic anomaly at the Summit League level.
Right.
But at Alabama, I don't think he's an above-average athlete. I saw him play at the Combine, and he looked coordinated and long, but he didn't look strong and explosive. And those are traits I would say are very prevalent in the SEC. Like, imagine him playing against Tennessee's front court. Tobe Awaka is a rebounding machine. You look, they lost Olivier Kamwa, but they still have just Jonas Adu, all these enormous bodies on the interior. And so I'm just curious to see how he holds up, what his role would be with Alabama, especially considering Bediako left. If Bediako had stayed, I think he fits more naturally as a stretch four. Now I think he's going to have to play more in the interior and more physically. So I have tempered expectations for the guys transferring out. But that said, I am very curious to see, because obviously Shireman excelled in his role.
Well, there's also a handful of guys coming into the conference. We'll talk about a few of them a little bit later in the show, but that's always an intriguing part of like which high major guys coming down to the Summit League level, guys who didn't produce much at their respective schools, are going to kind of step up and be guys who really produce, because that happens every single year. And it's always kind of fun to try to gamble on who those might be. But the last big storyline, not only did Oral Roberts lose Abmas, who of course one of the best players in college basketball last year, best scorers at least, and Connor Vanover, an elite rim protector, huge bodied guy who goes to Mizzou. They also lost their head coach. Paul Mills goes over to Wichita State after 6 seasons at Oral Roberts, won 106 and 84, excuse me, 2 NCAA tournament appearances, of course, both with Max Abmas there. Now he's over with the Shockers, and they bring in Russell Springman as their new head coach. He spent the last 5 years as an assistant at Oral Roberts, so he's familiar with the system. He's probably not going to make a lot of dramatic changes, which when the team went 18-0 last year, you don't want to make a ton of dramatic changes. This is also a coach who has 25 years of college basketball experience. He spent 17 years as an assistant at Texas with Rick Barnes. So he has coached with some of the best. He has been under some of the best. He made 13 NCAA tournament appearances. He's been to 5 Sweet 16s. He helped recruit guys named TJ Ford and Kevin Durant when he was at Texas. So a guy who doesn't have head coaching experience, which I think people might kind of raise an eyebrow at for a school like Oral Roberts, but man, this is somebody who has been around this game for a really long time. And I think you got to feel pretty good about bringing him in to replace somebody as solid as Paul Mills was.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what impact he has in terms of recruiting at this level, because Oral Roberts is now pretty much a well-known commodity, like even by people not like you and me who are diehard fans. Like, everyone knows who they are because they made the Sweet 16 a few years ago, and now they had Max Abmas, and they were a very popular upset pick over Duke. They didn't win, but like that gives you some relevancy. And I'm curious to see if he has the recruiting chops to recruit people to Oral Roberts, whereas Texas, even though they weren't really that good program before TJ Ford, and obviously TJ Ford led to Kevin Durant, LaMarcus Aldridge, DJ Augustine, all these guys. I think that having that cachet pays dividends. And I think if he's given a bit of time, I think he could even elevate them to a better program than they were. Not saying that they're going to always go 18-0 in their league, but they may be able to win more frequently and become kind of like Wichita State was able to do, and establish themselves as a frequent arriver to the tournament, not just in a one big league.
Well, we're going to continue our conversation about Oral Roberts with discussion on if they can stay atop the standings despite all of the changes, who might challenge them for the Summit League auto bid, and some award predictions as well. All coming up after a word from today's sponsor, Gametime. Life is always so busy, and the last thing that I want to be stressed out about is buying tickets to events. Thankfully, there's Gametime, which has killer deals on last-minute tickets for all of the events that I want to go to. And when choosing seats for events, I get stressed out about trying to pick the right ones. I'm worried about the view. I'm worried about the sun being in my eyes. However, Gametime has images of views from your seat so that you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Forget planning months in advance. Gametime is the place for last-minute ticket deals. They have deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. You can get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, hockey, soccer, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. The Gametime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of that difference. So snag the tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, folks, still closing out the show here today, talking about the Summit League with Leaf Tulane of the Locked On NBA Big Board. And Leaf, we got to start talking about the favorites in the conference. We'll get to some dark horse teams as well, and then we'll make our award predictions. And look, we spent a lot of time talking about Oral Roberts, but again, when you go undefeated in conference play, you're going to tend to dominate conversations in a one big league. And I think with Oral Roberts, again, 18-0 in the Summit League last year, 30-5 overall, a popular pick to upset a Duke team that was playing really well. Now, they did not upset Duke in that game, but again, when you have that kind of cachet and that kind of pedigree and have earned that reputation, you're going to get a lot of those conversations. With Oral Roberts, they lose Max Abmas, 22 points per game last year. They lose Connor Vanover, 12.7 points per game last year, a lot of rebounds, big shot blocker as well. And you lose Carlos Jurgens, who averaged 9 and 4. So they lost a significant amount of talent, as well as, of course, their coach, Paul Mills. But as we just talked about, they are bringing in a coach who has some familiarity with the program, hopefully not too dramatic of a change for that team. And they keep Isaac McBride, who averaged 12, 3 and 3 last year. They keep Kareem Thompson, who was 8.5 points and 6 boards last year. So they got some valuable role guys coming back, potentially stepping up into bigger roles. They also had a couple of transfers that I'm intrigued by, guys who didn't do much at their previous schools. They bring in Jalen Miller, who played 47 games at Rutgers and averaged less than a point per game, 6'2" combo guard coming in. They also bring in Braden Moore coming over from BYU. Braden Moore, 6'9" forward. He did not play at BYU last year, but again, a guy who was recruited to that school, has got some size, could potentially come in and make some noise. So Leaf, I kind of want to just ask, it seems like Oral Roberts still kind of has to be the team to beat in the conference, but with the amount of changes being made, do you think that there's an opportunity for somebody else to maybe step in here and take this Summit League title?
I actually like South Dakota State an awful lot.
Yeah.
I when I started thinking about it myself, I hadn't done as much research, and just behind the scenes, Andy and I kind of research it separately, and then we have a document we refer to. I looked at the document, see if I missed anything when I was thinking about it on my own, and I was like, well, this makes sense as to why they're the favorite. But in terms of my basketball mind, I don't like to bet on someone I haven't seen. Yeah. And when you lose a guy like Max Abmas, and I don't think Vanover was that great, like he was good, and because he's been an SEC guy, he's going back to the SEC. But I think he's overrated. Like Duke absolutely exposed him. Yeah. So I don't think that loss is enormous, but the Abmas one is enormous. And before that, it was not McCullough. What's his name? Texas Tech. Kevin O'Banner. And so I think what really matters is how they're going to replicate the scoring production Abmas was able to do. Like, they're not going to be able to generate the looks for others because of the attention that Abmas drew. And that's what actually concerns me. Not that Abmas's points per game will be lost. It's the ease with which other players were able to score because of Abmas. So for me, South Dakota State's actually my favorite because they return some players that I think could be player of the year candidates. And we'll get to that in a bit. So I don't want to bury the lead there. But I also think that they return depth. And that's really important to me because I think continuity in these type of leagues is more important than in leagues with enormous amounts of talent, because that can be like talent can supersede continuity on a given night. And then as you become more more intertwined as a team, with that talent supersedes. So I think in this type of league, I'm going to go with continuity, and I think they have the player of the year. So I'm going to go South Dakota State.
Right. It's worth pointing out South Dakota State was 13-5 last year, finished second. So it's not like, they're not a dark horse necessarily. They are the team that is probably most likely to challenge Oral Roberts at the top. And you mentioned some of the guys coming back, and we will touch on them. But I also like their addition of Nate Barnhart, a 7-foot center who comes over from Wyoming. He only played about 11 minutes per game last year with the Cowboys, 2.5 points, 2 boards. So wasn't super productive. But again, and kind of same note with Vanover, like 7-foot plus guys aren't in the Summit League all that often. And so they end up tending to put up big numbers in part just because of their size. A team like Duke is going to be able to expose Vanover much better than a team like, Western Illinois or St. Thomas or some of the other teams in the Summit League. So I think that helps. Just getting a guy in like Barnhart for South Dakota State strikes me as a move that might really benefit them. And I wanted to move on and talk about the dark horse team that I had. And that's the Denver Pios. And Denver finished 8th last year. And I think when I've done dark horses in the past, I rarely pick teams below like 5th or 6th. So this is a true legitimate dark horse team that I think could compete here in the Summer League. They keep a lot of their core talent from last year. Tommy Bruner was a guy who averaged 16 points, 4 assists last year. Tuco Tainamo averaged 10.5 points, 6.4 rebounds last year. And I really like the 4 transfer portal additions they made. I'll go through them quickly. Isaiah Adu-Ankra is a guy who was at San Antonio, averaged 7 points, 3 boards, shot 35% from deep. Jackson Brenchley comes over from Utah, grad transfer, didn't play much during his time with the Utes, but again, a guy who spent 4 years at a Power 5 school, that never hurts. Devin Carney comes over from Duquesne, didn't play there. And then they add Isaiah Carr from Grand Canyon. He started 6 games for them last year, only played 9 total games, but 7-foot guy, again, never hurts to have that in that conference. So for me, I think Denver's a team that they have enough intriguing new talent as well as some returning talent that was some of the best on their roster to at least give them a look of like, hey, if the pieces fit together well, they got the sharpshooter, they got the size, they got the vet. Like if all of that comes together, do they challenge Oral Roberts in South Dakota State? Maybe not, but could they go from 8th to 3rd? Could they go on a run in the Summit League tournament? I don't think it's crazy to imagine that that is at least worthy of consideration for a dark horse team here in this conference.
It's an interesting one because I think there is talent, an infusion of talent from Power 5 for a team that hasn't traditionally had it. So that's a possibility. Just a quick aside, Jackson Brenchley is a Utah State tennis champion. He did in 3rd singles. He's a year older than me. And so I've actually met him a few times.
Yeah.
Nice dude. So I'm hoping for the best for him there. But I am interested to see what players that are kind of little used in Power 5 programs are able to do for a team like that, where the opportunity is there, especially in a conference that has lost a lot of its premier talent. Like if you were to look at the top 5 players of the league, I think only one that you would have said from last year stayed, and that's Zeke Mayo.
Yeah.
And so I'd be pretty interested to see them rise. I agree with you. I wouldn't go as far as to say they can contend. Like you said, maybe 3rd is kind of the option there. I'd be curious to see how some like Barnhart, like you mentioned, that's a guy that I think really is going to take a step up as well. So I'm curious to watch this. I also am very curious what the preseason poll says here, because I wonder how many people are just gonna be like, oh, well, they lost talent or they gained talent and haven't like thought about it. Because I think the gap between 1 and 2 is fairly substantial, but I would say 3 through even 9 is going to be pretty close.
Totally. Well, moving on to our award predictions here, and you teased it, and it's kind of the obvious choice, I think, in my mind, at least until we see some actual basketball getting played. But player of the year for me is Zeke Mayo, South Dakota State, the only Summit League first teamer who's coming back, a guy who averaged 18 points per game last year. He also averaged 6.2 boards, 3.4 assists, 1 steal, shot 37% from deep. This is a dude who loaded up the stat sheet. Not quite Baylor Shireman, not quite that productive all around, but again, that kind of production as a sophomore coming into his junior year, he's not going to be the next Max Abmas probably, but it's not crazy to imagine him once again challenging for 20 points per game. And I think looking at the rest of the league, he strikes me as the guy who's probably going to take home this award.
Yeah, I think it's hard to argue. Like I mentioned, I think the best team's going to be South Dakota State. So I'm going to go with the best player on the best team. And I know that's kind of lame, to be honest, but he's 18-6. The best players that were his competition are gone. And also, I just want to make one big point. We haven't mentioned Andrew Rohde from St. Thomas leaving. Yeah. I think he would have been the favorite for me had he stayed, and he was a little bit of a surprise to enter the transfer portal. He's at Virginia, and I think he'll be good there. He was 17-6 as a freshman. Yeah. So the reason I bring that up is 18-6 for Mayo is as an established upperclassman, and then I popped in my head. I was like, man, this guy would have been awesome. Yeah, but yeah, Zeke Mayo to me is the clear front runner.
Transfer/newcomer of the year, I'm going to go with Isaiah Odo-Ankra, the guy coming over from UT San Antonio, joining Denver. 7 points, 3 boards, like we said last year in 23 games with San Antonio. 6'6" guard, 35% 3-point shooter last year. I think Denver has some other guards coming back, so I think he's going to play kind of a wing role. I think he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot. I think he's going to be relied upon to be a significant scorer. I could see him being up in the double digits for Denver, and if they make a push, if they move from 8th to 5th, 8th to 4th, something like that, and he's one of their more productive players, I think he could take home this award.
I'll go with Nate Barnhart, though. I mentioned it just beforehand. You said that there aren't many 7-footers in the Summit League, and he's a true 7-footer. And he was at Wyoming. Wyoming's not Power 5, but they were in the tournament a couple years ago. They played Indiana, and it was one of the most awful basketball games I've ever watched in my life. And I watch a lot of basketball games. But the reason I bring that up is because typically players that have the capacity to play and they were recruited for a team that was just in the tournament means they've got Division I high level athleticism. I think he'll be able to take advantage of it. And like I mentioned, he's on one of the best teams, the team that I think will be the best team. And I think that really just incentivizes a player to, play their role, excel in it. And it also just accelerates their chances to win some hardware, considering they're prevalent in the discussion.
Coach of the year for me, I'm going with Jeff Wellbrun at Denver. I already kind of staked my claim on Denver as the dark horse team, so I might as well stick with it going through these award predictions. Wellbrun's been there for 2 years now. He won 11 games in his first season. He won 15 games last year. If we keep that projection up, he wins 19, 20 games this year. Like we said, goes from 8th to 5th, 8th to 4th in that conference. A lot of times we see coach of the year given not necessarily just automatically to the team that won. I think if South Dakota State does take over for Oral Roberts, there's a good chance that that their coach takes home the award there. But to me, I think Wilbrun's done a good job with that Pio squad, and if they continue to progress, I could see him taking home the trophy.
You know what? I'll ride with you on this one because, like you said, if South Dakota State does win, I think they're going to clean up some hardware. So I will go with you on this in Denver. And I think a dark horse, I do believe, and this is just a slight aside, I think coach of the year should typically go, even in the Power 5 conferences, to a team whose expectations were outside of the top 5 and was exceeded.
Leaf, thanks so much for coming on, man. Love doing these conference preview series. That is going to wrap us up for today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. We got more conference preview series coming your way later this week, and of course, getting into next week as we continue to break down every conference in college basketball. Keep you updated on the newest goings on in the sport as well as we get closer and closer to that season. Thank you so much for sticking with us. Make sure to check out the show wherever you get your podcast. Check us out on YouTube. Smash that like button. Smash that subscribe button if you have not done so yet. We'll talk to you next week, or we'll talk to you later this week and into next week. For now, as always, peace out.